Well, hey folks, maybe this is the last video that I will record for this semester. You've still got a couple that you have to watch, but I've already recorded those. I don't do these things in sequence. But this may be the most important one. And the reason for that is because a big part of your grade rides on how well you do these interviews that you've been preparing for all semester. And you certainly are going to want to know what I'm looking for in terms of how I'm going to grade you. So I want to talk through in this video how you might go into the interviews mentally and emotionally, how you'll prepare for them, how you can make your time work to your advantage. And then I want to talk a good bit about how I'm going to grade this thing so that you know exactly what to do to prepare to get the outcomes that you're looking for. Let's jump right in here with the overview project. First thing we want to consider is that there are some things that you need to remember going in. First of all, you want to be early. Now, you have set up a series of days and times, and candidates have selected some of those times. Generally speaking, they know that they have an interview Tuesday at 8 or Saturday at 3. But a few days before the interview, you want to send them an email saying, I'm looking forward to our interview on Tuesday at 8 or Saturday at 3 or whenever it is. Just as a reminder, here is this is the job that you are interviewing for, cashier or delivery driver or whatever it is. And your interview will be using this video link. Give them the link. Encourage them sometime before the first interviews start on Saturday. So maybe you're talking to them on Tuesday or Wednesday. Encourage them on Thursday or Friday maybe to click on that link and make sure that they can get their video and their audio to work. And maybe even in the email that you send them, remind them that there is no plan B. If they try to log into the video call and their equipment and technology does not work, they are out of luck. Maybe there is a way that you can create a second interview slot for them sometime later. And I would encourage you to do that if that's what has to happen so that you get all of your practice interviews and they get theirs as well. But we're going to try to avoid that by making them log in early and test their equipment. Whatever time it is that they're supposed to log in, 2 o'clock, 8 o'clock, whatever, you'll encourage them to be as close to on time as they possibly can. So if it's a 2 o'clock interview, maybe they're joining the call right at 2 or a minute or two before 2. But you want to be there before them, maybe as much as even 5 minutes before them. The way that Ultra Collaborate works is that the first person who gets into the video chat room just kind of sits there alone. But when other people join after you get in, you get a pop-up window that says John Smith is joining the call. So you've got a little bit of a heads up that they're in there yet. Now, they haven't gotten the ability to see you yet, and they haven't shared their audio and their video yet. And you can kind of get ready. So be there about 5 minutes early. It's pretty awkward if the candidate logs into the call before you get there and they're sitting around for a few minutes. Much better if you're waiting on them than the other way around. During that time, just go over in your head what your strategy is. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. These are the things that I'm looking for. This is why I'm doing this. And when I say on this slide cohesion, just again think through all of your questions. If this is not your first interview, think back to the previous interview or interviews and remind yourself what you could have done better on so that you can make some adjustments here. But in terms of cohesion, make sure that everything you do on this call fits according to a purpose and according to a pattern, and everything fits well together. That's one of the things that they're going to be looking for as they give us some feedback about you. How well did it all flow? How well did it all go together, and did it make sense? So forth. So first of all, be early. Second of all, be professional. Don't go into these things wearing a t-shirt, maybe not even guys a golf shirt, ladies a sundress. Look nice. Pretend like this is the real thing. Mrs. Perry is encouraging her folks, or whoever the teacher is for the business communications class, is encouraging their folks to take this seriously, to dress nicely. If you are going to an interview in the real world, you probably, guys, wear a coat and tie. And I would encourage you to do that on this call as well so that you represent our company well. Don't be casual. Don't even be business casual. Make sure that your hair is nice. Ladies, you've got the pearls or the earrings or the lipstick or whatever, that you've got a nice dress, you've got a coat and tie on, whatever. Your clothing and your grooming say an awful lot about you, and that could be the first impression that makes the difference on this person accepting your job offer when the time comes. So be early and be professional. Third, be very, very respectful. Be friendly, be outgoing, be warm. Give off the impression to the candidate that they're doing you a favor by applying for your job. So be very gracious. Thank them and be sincere about it. Be appreciative. Give them cues throughout the interview. That's a good answer. I really enjoyed that. I learned something about you that really helps me as I make my decisions. Respect is really, really, really critical in all of these things. And as you'll see later in the grading, that is something that they're going to be assessing you on. How well did you exhibit that you respected them as individuals? Next thing, be complete. In the course of this interview, you've got to find out in one chance everything you need to know to be able to make a decision of hire or don't hire. So you've got to make sure you've asked the questions, that you followed up if they were incomplete, that once the call is over, you can't go back and say, oh, you know what, I forgot to ask you this question, give me 2 more minutes. Everything you need to know. Usually when I do this and I tell my students that I'm looking for 40 or 45 minute interviews, they're going, oh, there's no way. And when they do the first few interviews, they last like 15 or 20 minutes. You can't get to know somebody in 15 or 20 minutes. So they say, well, how in the world are we supposed to do a 45-minute interview? Let me tell you that when we hire faculty members and we do video interviews with them, it's very easy for them to go an hour and 15 minutes long because we've got good questions that cause them to think, that cause them to do some soul searching and tell stories and so forth. And the general rule of thumb is that in the course of an interview, you want to talk for every minute you talk, they want to talk for 3 or 4 minutes. And if you can get the right combination of questions, 10 questions, they could talk for 30 minutes very easily answering those questions. So what would an interview look like if you were to shoot for about 45 minutes? Well, for the first minute or so, you just really want to set the stage. You want to welcome them. You want to sincerely thank them for their interest. Maybe you can say something about the fact that this is going to be very, very low key. It's just going to be two friends talking. I'm going to ask you some questions or whatever. This is somewhat the process as well coming up. But that your intention is that this is just going to be really casual, and that this you want them to feel at ease. You realize that they had a choice of 15 different jobs to interview for, and you're really grateful that they chose to interview for yours. But in the first minute, you can set the stage that I am not scary. You don't have to be worried or afraid or nervous. Just kind of be yourself. All right. So about a minute to open up the interview. Welcome to the interview. Thanks for coming. Thanks for showing interest. Maybe about 5 minutes to hit the highlights of our company, what we're trying to accomplish, how we're growing, why this job is important, how the job fits into the overall scheme and strategy of what we're trying to do. And then several minutes perhaps where you just remind them what the key responsibilities are for this job. Just, I know that you've read the job description, but just as a reminder, we're really looking for somebody who's going to be able to do these kinds of things. Here's 4 or 5 things that you'll do on a regular basis. The ideal candidate is going to be somebody who has these kinds of things in their background. And the setting that you're going to work in is that you're going to be on your own a lot, or you're going to be interacting with a mentor or the manager or whatever. It'd be very, very easy to fill up 5 minutes talking about the company, talking about the job that they're interviewing for. You're 6 minutes in now. 2 minutes, quick overview of the process. Okay, here's the way that it's going to work. I'll ask you a question. It's pretty open-ended generally, and I'll just ask you to kind of think about it for a second, and then spend a couple minutes maybe telling me about what your impression is of that question, or giving me an example of something that I've asked you for, going into some detail about that example so that I can really begin to get a picture in my mind of the setting that you were in and what you were doing. And in about 2 minutes here, just kind of say, here's what we're going to do. I'll ask you a question, you give me an answer. I'll ask you another question, you'll give me another answer. I may follow up with a question if something didn't make sense, or if I thought I was missing something. We might be 8 minutes into the interview right now. Then you start with your questions, maybe about 30 minutes. I would suggest that you figure they're going to talk, if you can get them to talk for 2 or 3 minutes per question, you need to have 10 or 12 questions ready of kind of tell me story kinds of things. Give me an example of a time, things like that. So 30 minutes worth of this is the questions that you ask. Then you kind of transition. and maybe you've mentioned this in the 2-minute interview process, after I've asked you a bunch of questions, I'll give you an opportunity to ask me some questions about the job, about the company, about the benefits, whatever you want to ask about. So then maybe have 5 minutes where you say, what questions do you have for me? Now here, this is a little bit challenging for you because they may ask you questions that we haven't talked about in this class. They may ask you questions about benefits or about what vacation days we observe or about particular policies or things like that. You may have to make this up off the top of your head, and there is no wrong answer. Have fun. Do the best you can to come up with an answer. Think quick on your feet. Think quick on your seat. Answer their questions as honestly as you can, as believably as you can, but answer whatever it is they ask you. You may even sometimes say, that's a great question. I got to kind of think about that for a second. This is what the answer is. All right, so about 5 minutes. You're probably at this point, you're at 43 minutes into an interview here. Then you've got about 2 minutes real quick where you say, here's what's going to happen. We've got, you're the first of 4 interviews, so we've still got several interviews over the next 4 days, or you're the last of the interviews, or whatever. After the final interview is done, I'll spend a day or two kind of thinking back about the individual candidates and what their answers were and my impressions of them. I ought to be making a decision by Tuesday of next week. And then you'll say, you'll hear from me whether you got it or whether you didn't, or I'm only going to contact the person who's getting offered the job. Whatever the case is, you determine what that looks like, but give them the follow-up. What happens next? Don't be worried if you don't hear anything in the next couple of days. What's the timeline, so forth. And then the last minute, you're like at 46 minutes now. Thank you again so much for taking the interest, for showing an interest in our job, in our company. It's been great talking to you. I've gotten to know a lot about you, and as I interview the other candidates, I'll be making some decisions about how we might be able to work together in the future, if that's appropriate. It's not that hard, trust me, to fill up 45 minutes. It really depends on the quality of your questions and the degree to which you force them to talk a little bit. That's what it ought to look like if you do 30 to 45 minutes. And be consistent. And the last thing to remember here, you really want to ask the same questions to every single candidate. If you ask candidate 1 this question, but you don't ask that same question to candidate 2, it's hard to compare them. So as much as you can, ask the same questions to everybody. Now, one candidate won't answer the question very completely, so you've got to follow up. But the follow-up ought to be tied to the first question. Resist the temptation of asking a question off the top of your head that just occurred to you. If you don't ask that question again of everybody, it's going to be hard to compare them. And then not only do you ask them the same questions, but you use the same evaluation process. That's why we created the matrix, so that you could very consistently, logically evaluate everybody the same way. All right. So what is it going to look like in terms of the grading for this project? There's 4 main components. The candidates are going to take up almost 2/3 of the scoring for this through a survey that they're going to complete after the interview is done. That's 59%, 59 points out of 100. You're going to provide 15 points out of 100. Some technical components of the interviews is going to be 20 points. And then I've got some flexibility with 6 points out of the 100. Let's look at each of those things real quick. Remember again that I'm going to send them a survey, a Word document survey, that they're going to complete and turn back into their teacher. Each of the questions that I ask, it accomplishes 2 things. First of all, it gets input for you to give you feedback, but also it gives me some information that I can do some statistical analysis on this project for potentially using in some papers that I'm looking to write for publication in academic journals. That's my disclaimer. First thing, the candidate input. They're going to give me input about you. One question on the survey that they're going to do is going to have your name, John Smith or Susie Jones or whatever. John Smith was professional in his or her appearance. That's why it's important that you wear that coat and tie, that you wear those pearls, whatever, that your hair is nice and neat, that your smile is good, your glasses are on straight. If you're not professional, they're going to say, I strongly disagree, or I somewhat disagree, and you're going to lose points. If you have very sharp attire, coat and tie, a nice dress, business suit, remember they can't see you from the waist down, so you, for crying out loud, you could wear shorts with a nice shirt, tie, and jacket, but they're going to see from shoulders up. You have no idea what I'm wearing below the waist. I happen to have on blue jeans today, but you can tell what I look like on the top. I would not go to an interview like this. I would put on a coat and tie. I would look very, very nice. So the first question for 5 points. This person was the interviewer, was professional in your appearance. Hopefully they're going to say strongly agree. There would be no reason for them to say anything else, but sometimes they'll say somewhat agree. Second thing for 5 points deals with how you handled this interview. If you seemed to be in command, if it flowed well, if you knew what you were doing. John Smith was professional in how he handled the interview. I strongly disagree with that. I strongly agree with that. That's worth 5 points. Next, how well did you communicate? John Smith was professional in his communication processes. If you didn't seem to know what you're talking about, if you weren't easy to understand, if you talked too fast, too slow, too soft, or too loud, those could work against you. But if you've got a nice voice, you've got some life in your voice, you've got good eye contact, the nonverbals, all that kind of stuff, they ought to say, yeah, I really thought that he or she did pretty well, so strongly agree. So appearance, handling, communication, and then here's one of the keys. Susie Jones treated me with respect. That ought to be so easy. Just thank them a lot, tell them you appreciate them a lot, that you're grateful a lot. Listen very, very attentively, smile, give visual cues that you understand, that you're enjoying the answer, the process is not just draining to you or whatever. If you show them respect, they ought to say strongly agree, no problem. So that's 20 points about you. Then 39 points about the process itself. First of all, for 10 points, the questions that I was asked were related to the job. That's why it's so important, as you did those interview questions and I gave you feedback on those questions, that they go to the skills needed to do this job, or they go to the tasks that the candidate will be doing on this job. Every single question ought to tie back to that job description somehow. The candidate ought to be able to say, you know what, you just asked me this question about a time when I did this, or when I remembered a time, or how I acted in a situation where I did this. And the candidate ought to be able to say, you know what, I remember something on the job description that says that on a regular basis I'm going to be working with a cash register and having to count back change and whatnot. So that's subconsciously, as a candidate, I ought to be able to say, that's why you asked me that question. If the questions definitely, logically relate to things that are tied into that job description, they ought to say, yeah, I strongly agree. All of those questions, I understand the purpose for that. None of them seem to be fishing. None of them just seem to be out there, whatever. If they circle a 5 on that, I strongly agree. I'm going to double the point value on this, so it'll be worth 10 points. If they strongly disagree, you'll get points, but only 2. You will have lost 8 points out of 100. So make sure that the questions are related to the job. It was the proper length. There's no way of knowing what they think the proper length is, but I can promise you almost with certainty that if this interview is 15 or 20 minutes, they're going to go, no, that was not the proper length. If it goes an hour, they're going to go, gosh, that was so long. But if it's in the 40-minute range, they're going to go, yeah, that was probably the proper length. There's a follow-up question here. If they say, no, I don't agree that it was the proper length, I'm going to ask them if they think it should have been longer or should have been shorter. So keep an eye on the time a little bit. Go through the questions the way that you've got them, but try to manage it to where it's about 40, 45 minutes or so, okay? It was the proper length, 5 points. Make sure, tied into the questions related to the job, that you take enough time to really get a sense for if they can do this job or not. The nature of your questions and your follow-ups, if they are appropriate, ought to give a real good signal to the candidate that you took enough time to determine whether he or she was a good fit for this job. You didn't just kind of blow them off, or you hadn't made up your mind before the interview ever started. I have a friend who went for a job interview one time, drove a long way to get there, and as soon as he walked in, the person who was doing the interview saying, we have to interview 6 candidates, you're number 4, we've already decided we're hiring the first one. It's like, well, why in the heck did I drive up here? You want to communicate to them that you are open to the possibility of them filling this job, and that you are aggressively and eagerly looking to make sure that there is a fit, that they are qualified for this job, and that you took enough time to be able to make a good decision, yes or no, that they are. All right, so 39 points there. Was it a fair process? I believe that the interview process, as I experienced it, was a fair one. If they disagree with that it was fair, you're going to lose points. They ought to be able to say, you know what, the questions were good, they took enough time, they seemed interested, they listened well, I think it was fair. If they disagree, I'm going to ask them in that follow-up question, what was it that happened that made you feel it was unfair? If you gave off a signal that you had already made up your mind, or if you made a comment that the first candidate's going to be hard to beat, they're going to go, well, that wasn't really fair. He didn't go into this with an open mind, okay? So was it a fair process? 10 points. Next, were any of the questions based upon their perspectives illegal or unethical? Now that's completely their perspective, but if you have good questions, they're not going to have reason to think that they're not. So, make sure, obviously, you don't ask them about if they're going to have babies in the near future, or ask them about anything that's illegal, that's protected by law. They ought to all be related to the job. This is reverse scoring because I'm asking them about illegal questions and we want them to say no, there were none. So if they strongly agree that there were unethical, it's only 1 point. If they strongly disagree that there were unethical, meaning that they were all ethical, you're going to get the full 5 points. What questions, as a follow-up, do you think were unethical or illegal? Now, the candidate may say, yeah, I believe they asked me some illegal questions, and if I say, what question was it, they may give me a question, and I go, that wasn't illegal. Well, it's their perspectives. Most of the time, I've done this for 5 or 6 different class periods now, it's very rare to ever get a candidate say that this was an illegal question, because we've talked about these questions and we've revised these things and reworded these things, and by the time you ask the question, if you asked it the way it was written, there's no problem with it. Would they accept the job? This is really interesting to me. If this had been a real interview with a real company, would this interviewer have impressed you enough to accept this job offer? If they say definitely yes, you just scored 4 points. Maybe yes, probably yes, 2 points. But if they say no, probably no, or definitely no, you're actually going to have points subtracted from your grade. So you want to present a positive enough image of yourself, of the job, and of the company that they would say, yeah, you know what, if you made an offer, I'd take it. That's very, very important. You always want to have such a positive interaction with your candidates that they would be willing to accept a job if you offered it. Then you're going to give me input about them. You'll remember from the Dropbox that part of what you submit me at the end of it is a list of each one of the names and a couple of positive qualities and a couple of negative qualities and then some overall impressions. And I'm going to be looking for the detail that you give me. This is worth up to 15 points. If you give me good feedback on them, not just 1 or 2 word things, dressed well or smiled a lot or whatever, but really took some time to think about their answers, answered very, very precisely, gave great examples, looked very sharp and professional and would represent our company well. Those are well done positive qualities. Didn't make good eye contact is not a well stated negative. Certainly it's a negative quality, but tell me more about why. Your overall impressions. If you give me complete sentences rather than just a word or 2, you ought to get most of these 15 points. Then technical input. Each one of your interviews is intended to be 40 or 45 minutes, and each one of the interviews is intended to be videotaped so that we could go back and look at them later. Now, honesty, upfront, open. I probably won't watch any of them start to finish, but I will look at pieces, early, middle, late, ending, of almost every single one of them. The video that you give me will have a time on it, and I'll be able to confirm how long your interview lasts. You're only going to do either 3 or 4 interviews. Hopefully you'll get 4. I've built this for 5. So if you do 4 interviews and all 4 of them were 40 minutes, or I'm saying 30 minutes or more, I'm hoping for 40, but the rubric here is for 30 or more, then you're going to get 4 interviews times 2 points apiece, and you're going to get a bonus of 2 for the 5th interview that never happened. If it's less than 30 minutes, and I'm talking about productive time, if you get to the end of your questions and it's at 25 minutes and you just kind of stall for 5 minutes, that's not productive time. Good questions, good use of their time. If you only have 3 interviews, it's 3 potentially at 2 points each, and the 4th one and the 5th one, you're going to get the benefit of the doubt, and you're going to get those 2 points. Also, in terms of the video, if you videotape it, you're going to get 2 points. If you don't videotape it, you will get no points for that one. Even if you don't have 5, you won't. If you have 4 and you video all 4, you're going to get 10 points. 2 points each for the 4 that you videoed, and 1 pretending like the fifth interview that never happened was video 2. So if you do 4 interviews, you don't interview any of them, you don't videotape any of them, you're going to get 2 points because the fifth one is an automatic 2 points. Okay, so 10 points if they are all in the at least 30 minutes range. Again, I'm looking for 40, but I'm going to give you credit if they're at least 30. And in past semesters, I've had people that didn't even make 30. When they did 5 interviews, none of them lasted 30 minutes. They didn't learn anything from the first few interviews to help them on the last ones. Make them all 30 minutes, preferably 40 minutes. You're going to do fine here. Videotape every single one of them. Even if you think about it in the middle of the interview, I forgot to start the video. Say, let me interrupt you for a second there. I'm supposed to be videoing this. I'm going to start the video now. And then you might say, for the benefit of the viewer, we're about 10 minutes into the interview now. Okay? Then my input, 6 points. I'm going to think back about this semester, really, not just this project, but how we have interacted one-on-one. What has your attitude been like? Have you been open to learning? Have you been receptive of my ideas? Have you fought back on every little thing and challenged my professional impressions of what you're doing here? Remember that I've done these things at all kinds of levels. Entry-level jobs I've interviewed people for. Faculty members who are smarter than me, I've interviewed people for those kinds of jobs. So I kind of know what I'm doing. If all along this semester, at this point it's too late to go back and change, but if you've had a good attitude, if you've contributed to the process, you've not made me do it for you, whatever, you'll get points here. And a part of it really is just my impression. You're a feel factor. I feel pretty good about this, or I've not felt good about this all semester long. Now the good thing here is that even if you've done a lousy job all semester long, it's only 6 points out of 100. So you could still theoretically make an A on this thing, even if I don't think that this has gone very well. Keep in mind, though, that if I think that your attitude has been stinky, probably the candidates will too, and that'll affect the rest of the scoring. All right, additional candidate input that does not impact the grading. I'm going to ask them, what is one thing that you did well? And what is one thing that you could do to be better? And then I'm going to ask them, what would you give them about what feedback about the process as a whole? I'll give you averaged, I'll talk about this on another slide, average numbers in terms of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s on all those other questions, but these are verbatim questions. Just like at the end of the semester normally when you do a class evaluation on me, some questions you score on a strongly disagree, strongly agree, and they number those things and they give me an average number. But there are other questions they ask you to fill in the blank and type a sentence. They give me that word for word, and I'm going to, unless there's something really scathing in there, I'm going to give you word for word what they tell me in these questions. What did they do well? What could they do better? And what about the process as a whole? All right, I'm also going to ask some demographic information. Has this candidate ever interviewed somebody before? If they never have, they're not going to kind of have a good feel for what you're going through. But if they've interviewed people before, they're unconsciously, subconsciously, whatever, going to be comparing you to how they did it in real life before. Approximately how many job interviews have you gone on in the last 5 years? Again, not only are they going to compare how you do this interview to how they have done it themselves in the past, but they're also going to compare it to other real life experiences where they have been answering the questions. What is your gender, male or female? Kind of helps us to make some distinctions in academic analysis of whether males think differently about certain things than females do. And what range best describes your age? 20 or younger is the traditional college student. 21 to 25 is the slightly non-traditional. And 26 or older represents somebody that's been in the workforce for a while. So they'd have a very, very different impression of what all this looks like and should look like. So demographic information. What's the process? When your interview is done, I'm going to email that candidate a survey that is specific to you. It's got your name throughout the thing. The candidate, the business communication student, will complete that survey and they'll save that file some random name like Big Bang Theory or Pink Rabbit or My Little Pony or Designated Survivor or Atlanta, Georgia or something, but they're not going to use their name. They're going to take that file named Big Bang Theory and they're going to attach that file to a Dropbox in their class in business communications. The teacher for the business communications class is going to take all of those files and send them to me without ever opening them. Why is that? The business communications teacher will know that Johnny submitted an analysis file. But this business communication teacher does not need to know what Johnny said. The fact that it's named Big Bang Theory and not Johnny's File means that when I get it, I'll know that somebody said this, but I won't know who said it. So neither teacher will know what a particular student said. All right, the instructor will send it to me without opening the file. I'll input all the numbers into a spreadsheet. Then I will take all of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s and I'll average them to come up with a grade before I submit the final grade. I'll then give to you some feedback on what the averages were on certain aspects of the thing, and I'll also give you the verbatim feedback that they gave you. And at the same time, you're going to submit your Dropbox where you list all of the people that you interviewed, some good things, some bad things, some overall impressions, and I'm going to take that and compile a file that I send to the business communication instructor that he or she, depending on the semester that we're doing this project, can use to give specific feedback to them. So they're going to see your verbatim comments. You may, even when you are being critical, let's say some negative things, you're going to be gentle in how you say it. But because I'm going to tell them, if they don't make good eye contact and you talk about that, I'm going to tell them what you said, and hopefully I won't have to temper what they've said about you. Hopefully I won't have to temper what you've said about them. But you'll both get some pretty good feedback on what you did well and how you can improve. Well, that is the overview of the project. Hopefully you got a couple of things out of this video. Number one, how can you prepare? Number two, how can you make this daggum interview last for 40 minutes, at least for 30 in terms of grading purposes, but preferably for 40. If you use that timeline, it ought to work out most of the time. And then number three, how am I going to get a grade for this thing? Okay. If you have questions, just like with all these other videos that I've done, if you have questions, send me an email or post something on Ask Dr. Grimes in our class. But again, I hope that but I've spent enough of this time. I'm over 30 minutes now on this one video. I hope that you've gotten enough information out of this to where towards the end of this week or early next week, you'll be able to go into this first interview with a really solid plan on how you're going to do this, and you're going to have it all figured out to the point where you're going to do well. One last thought that I'll give you is that as you're doing your interviews, that you're going to have on the table in front of you a copy of the matrix for that person. So if you've got 4 interviews, that you've printed your matrix 4 times, 1 per person, you're going to have a copy of the questions that you're planning to ask each candidate. Maybe with enough space in between to where you can make some notes. But if it's just a list of the questions, then you're probably going to have a notepad off to the side as well where you can make some notes. At the very beginning, as part of the process, you probably want to say, listen, I'm going to be making some notes. I won't be making eye contact the whole time. Don't be alarmed if I'm not looking at you, if I appear to be writing something. I don't want to forget something that's important, so I'm going to make some notes. And as you do that interview, you're scoring things on your matrix, you're checking off questions you ask them, you're writing down comments about their responses and so forth, so that when you're done with that interview, you take those papers, you put them in a file folder, you get the next set out, and you do the next interview. When you're done, you put those things side by side, you score those things, you think about the intangibles, and hopefully one of them consistently rises to the top, and you say, I'd hire that one. Very easy. Again, I hope that this has been very informational for you, and that there are no questions left, no stones that have been unturned in order to do well on this project. Let me know if that doesn't do it for you, and we will address any issues that you still might have. Hope it goes well. I'm looking forward to getting the feedback from it.